I was the forgotten son for 20 years. Now my perfect brother destroyed our family, and they want my help. If I disappeared from this world today, would anyone even notice? This question has haunted me ever since I heard my mother whisper. We never wanted the first one anyway. This question has haunted me for as long as I can remember. I'm Alex Wilson, the firstborn son of the Wilson family, though you'd never know it by the way they act. In our household, there are only 3 people who matter. My father Robert, my mother Linda, and my little brother Connor. I'm just the extra character, unnecessary to the plot of their perfect family story. My father, Robert Wilson, rules our home with an iron fist. His reputation means everything to him, far more than his family ever could. My mother Linda follows his lead without question, a silent shadow who learned long ago that disagreement wasn't tolerated. And then there's Connor, my brother, who's 3 years younger with his golden hair, blue eyes, an angelic smile that fools everyone except me. I'm not just Connor's shadow, I'm his plaything. The toy he can break without consequences. The evidence of their favoritism has been painfully clear since I was small. On my 6th birthday, I unwrapped a cheap plastic toy car while Connor wasn't even celebrating his birthday, but still received an entire light-up racetrack collection. When I brought home straight A's in elementary school, my report card was met with distracted nods. When Connor scribbled meaningless drawings, they were proudly displayed on the refrigerator like priceless artwork. I still remember when Connor broke my gaming console. I'd saved for months from my allowance to buy it. You shouldn't leave your things lying around, Mom scolded me, while Connor watched with that smirk I've grown to hate. Everything changed when I was 10. After another day of being ignored, I finally gathered the courage to ask my mother the question burning inside me. Mom, why don't you ever care about me? She looked startled, then composed herself with a practiced smile. You're the older one, Alex. You don't need as much attention as Connor does. In that moment, the truth crystallized in my young mind. I wasn't necessary in this family. Connor has turned my life into a battlefield where I'm never allowed to win. He steals my belongings, sabotages my achievements, and frames me for his misdeeds. At school, he makes sure I have no peace there either, knowing full well nobody would ever take my side against him. I've learned to stay silent and endure because fighting back is pointless. Every time I've tried, I've been labeled the troublemaker, the jealous older brother who should know better. But I can't live like this forever. Something has to change. My salvation arrived in an unexpected envelope with a university letterhead. A full scholarship to one of the most prestigious universities, 3 states away. The moment I read those words, something inside me shifted. This wasn't just an acceptance letter. It was a golden ticket to freedom. A chance to step into a world where I wouldn't just be Alex Wilson, the forgotten son. A place where no one would compare me to Connor, where I could be more than just a shadow. That night at dinner, I clutched the letter in my sweaty palm, heart hammering against my ribs as I made my announcement. I got accepted, I said, my voice steadier than I expected. Full scholarship. My father barely looked up from his plate. You think you're special or something? He sneered, cutting into his steak with unnecessary force. My mother didn't even raise her eyes. You can't go, Alex. Connor would feel terrible if his brother became more successful than him. I glanced at Connor, who was leaning back in his chair with that self-satisfied smile, as if he'd already known the outcome of this conversation before it even began. As if my dreams being crushed was just another Tuesday night entertainment for him. I took a deep breath and shifted strategies. You're right, I conceded, watching their expressions. No surprise, just smug satisfaction. I should stay, but I'd like to live in the local college dorms to focus on my studies. My father grunted. Fine, just don't waste my money. Connor's smile widened, thinking he'd won again, that I'd remain trapped in his shadow, within his reach. What none of them knew was that I had already accepted the scholarship. Every detail had been arranged. I wouldn't be staying in this city. I wouldn't even be in this state. My tuition was covered. I wouldn't need a penny from my parents. Still, I'd let them send me money, compensation for every year I'd been overlooked, every moment I'd been treated like I didn't exist. I didn't see it as stealing. I saw it as collecting a long overdue debt. The day I left, nobody came to see me off. My father handed me an envelope with a few $100s without looking up from his laptop. "Don't blow it all in the first week," was all he said. My mother patted my shoulder mechanically. "Study hard," she murmured, as if I was just leaving for a normal school day. Connor didn't even look up from his phone. No hugs, no goodbyes, no indication they would miss me or even notice I was gone. I should have felt sad, but as I walked out that door for the last time, all I felt was relief. When I boarded the plane with my single suitcase, my heart was lighter than it had ever been. For the first time in my life, I was going somewhere where nobody knew about Connor, where nobody expected me to stay in the background, where I could finally breathe without someone telling me I was taking up too much air. As the plane took off, I watched my hometown shrink beneath me until it disappeared completely. Just like I was about to disappear from their lives. Only I would be doing it intentionally. My first day on campus felt like stepping onto another planet. No one whispered as I walked by. No one compared me to anyone else. No one looked at me with that familiar disappointment in their eyes. I wasn't Connor Wilson's useless brother anymore. I was just Alex Wilson, not a shadow, not a disappointment, not weighed down by impossible expectations. For the first time in my life, I could breathe. I threw myself into my studies with a ferocity that surprised even me. I knew exactly what it took to succeed because I'd spent my entire life watching what failure looked like. I worked 10 times harder than anyone else, stayed in the library until security kicked me out, took extra credits each semester, and networked with a determination that came from knowing I had nothing to fall back on. By the end of my first year, I was at the top of my class. Professors knew my name. Companies were sending internship offers. Doors were opening in ways I never thought possible for someone like me. Someone who had spent their life being invisible. Maintaining the lie was surprisingly easy. The occasional short, vague phone call home was all it took. "Yes, classes are tough, but I'm managing. No, I can't come home this weekend, too much studying." They never asked for details about my classes, my friends, or my life. As long as I played my part, they didn't care to dig deeper. Holidays were more complicated. I visited once or twice a year, just enough to maintain appearances. I kept my visits short, always claiming I needed to get back for assignments or projects. Each time I returned, the house felt smaller, colder. My father barely acknowledged my presence, too busy celebrating Connor's latest mediocre achievement. My mother still fussed over Connor as if he were still a child, cutting his food and doing his laundry, even though he was in his 20s. Connor acted as if I didn't exist, except when he needed to feel superior. "Still wasting time with books?" he'd sneer, sprawled across the couch, gaming controller in hand. I'd smile and say nothing, knowing what he didn't, that I was already soaring while he was still crawling. I pushed myself to graduate in 2 years instead of 4, taking summer courses and maximum credits each semester. By the time I was 20, I had my degree and multiple job offers. I accepted a position at one of the nation's top financial firms, with a 6-figure starting salary and a sleek, high-rise apartment with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. I had the freedom I'd only dreamed of. Meanwhile, Connor was still living at home, drifting from one failed project to another, living off our parents' money and goodwill. I should have felt vindicated. I'd achieved everything I'd worked for. I'd proven I wasn't just the forgotten son. I had the career, the apartment, the bank account, all the external markers of success. But on nights when I stood at my window looking out at the city lights, an unexpected emptiness gnawed at me. I had everything, but I had no one. No one to call when I got promoted. No one to celebrate with when I closed a major deal. No one who truly knew me or cared about the person I'd become. The silence in my apartment was deafening on those nights, pushing me to wonder. Had they ever really cared? Had there ever been a day when they truly saw me? I'd check my phone sometimes, scrolling through the sparse text exchanges with my family. They never asked how I was doing. They never seemed curious about my life. Our conversations were functional at best, a sterile exchange of information about holidays and occasional family news, usually about Connor's latest venture or my father's golf score. During one particularly low moment, I found myself scrolling through social media, looking at my parents' profiles. There were dozens of photos of Connor at the beach, Connor at dinner, Connor getting a participation trophy for a community run. I appeared in exactly 2 photos, both group shots where I was partially cropped out, It was as if I'd never existed to them, even when I was physically present. I'd spent years believing that my success would finally make them see me, that achieving more than Connor ever could would force them to acknowledge my worth. But the truth was staring back at me from every ignored text, every abbreviated phone call, every photo where I didn't appear. Nothing I did would ever make them see me, because the problem had never been me. It had always been them. The phone rang on a Tuesday evening as I was reviewing quarterly projections. When I glanced at the screen, my heart stopped for a moment. Caller ID, Robert Wilson, DAD. In 3 years, he hadn't called once. Not on my birthdays, not on holidays, not even to check if I was still alive. My thumb hovered over the screen, curiosity finally winning out over resentment. "Hello?" I answered, my voice carefully neutral. "Alex," my father's voice came through, commanding as ever. "You need to come home." I waited in silence, hoping against hope there might be something that would make me feel like I actually mattered to him. "Connor's wedding," he continued flatly. "You need to be there." Of course, I closed my eyes, leaning back in my leather office chair. 3 years of silence, and this was why he finally reached out. "Let me get this straight," I said slowly. "You haven't called me in 3 years, and the first time you do, it's to tell me I have to attend my brother's wedding." "Don't make this difficult," he said, irritation creeping into his voice. "You're his brother." "Am I?" I asked, surprising myself with the calmness in my voice. "You want me to come back? Fine. But tell me something. Dad, do you even know where I live?" The silence that followed was answer enough. He had no idea. He'd never bothered to check. "That's what I thought," I said, ending the call. An hour later, my phone lit up again. My mother's number. "Alex, do you really want to embarrass the family like this?" she started, skipping any greeting. "By not attending the wedding of a brother who doesn't even acknowledge my existence?" I replied. "You know Connor wants you there. We all do. Family is family, regardless." I nearly laughed at that. Family is family. As if they'd ever treated me like family. "Honey, we've always supported you," she continued. "We sent money, helped with college expenses. The least you could do is—" "Mom," I cut her off. "Dad hasn't paid for anything since I left." The silence on the other end was deafening. "I graduated over a year ago," I continued, the words pouring out now. "I have a 6-figure job. I make more money than Dad ever has." I took a deep breath, steadying myself for what I was about to say next. "I let you send money because I figured after all those years of treating me like I was nothing, you owed me at least that much." Dead silence greeted my confession. I could almost see her face, mouth open, eyes wide, the realization setting in that for years, I'd been playing them just as they'd played me. After we hung up, the flood began. My phone wouldn't stop vibrating. Calls, messages, voicemails. Not because they were sorry, not because they suddenly cared about the person I'd become, but because for the first time, they realized they no longer had any control over me. I scrolled through the texts, each one more demanding than the last. "Call us back immediately." "This is completely unacceptable." "We need to discuss this." "Your brother will be devastated." I turned my phone off and walked to the window, looking out at the city lights. 3 years of building my life piece by careful piece. 3 years of proving to myself that I was more than they ever believed I could be. And now they wanted me to walk back into that house, stand beside the brother who had tormented me, smile for family photos, as if we were one big happy family. It was almost laughable. In their world, I was supposed to be the dutiful son who came when called, no matter how long they'd ignored me. In their world, I was still that invisible boy, desperate for scraps of attention. But I wasn't in their world anymore. I'd created my own. Still, as I stared at my reflection in the darkened window, I couldn't ignore the knot forming in my stomach. This confrontation had been inevitable. The truth had finally emerged from the shadows where I'd kept it hidden. The question now was, what would I do with it? I didn't have to wait long for the fallout. 3 days after our call, my phone rang again, this time at 2 a.m. I almost didn't answer, but something told me I should. "Where the hell are you?" My father's voice was hoarse, unsteady. "What have you done with the money I sent you?" I sat up in bed, immediately alert. "Oh, that? Thanks, Dad." It really helped cover some expenses while I was getting my degree. Degree? What degree? From what school? The desperation in his voice told me everything I needed to know. He'd gone to the local university, likely intending to cancel my registration as punishment, only to discover I'd never been enrolled there. I graduated over a year ago, from a prestigious university on a full scholarship. I've been working at a top firm since then. Oh, and just so you know, my salary is about 10 times what you make. The silence on the other end lasted so long I thought he might have hung up. You ungrateful child. You lied to us. You betrayed this family. I laughed, the sound surprising even me. Betrayed? Be honest, Dad. You never cared about me. The only reason you're angry is that I escaped your control. What followed was a string of profanities I'd never heard my father use before. I let him vent, holding the phone away from my ear, watching the seconds tick by on my bedside clock. When he finally ran out of steam, I simply said, "Good night, Dad," and hung up. 2 days later, my mother called. This time, there was no anger in her voice. She was crying. "Alex, I miss you. I just want our family to go back to the way it was." A small part of me, buried deep, almost dead, wanted to believe her. Wanted to think that maybe, finally, they saw me. But reality crashed through. This was the woman who had overlooked me for most of my life, who had protected Connor every time he hurt me. "There's no going back, Mom," I said quietly. There was never anything to go back to. After hanging up, I called my aunt, the only family member who had never sided with my parents. She'd always seen through Connor's act, always had a kind word for me when no one else did. If anyone could tell me what was really going on, it would be her. "Oh, Alex," she sighed when I asked. "It's a mess. Connor's disappeared, and so has his fiancée." "Fiancé?" I echoed, genuinely surprised. I hadn't even known he was dating someone seriously. "She convinced your parents to invest their entire savings in some high-yield venture. It was a scam. Of course, when the money vanished, so did she." I felt a chill run down my spine as she continued. "Your parents were so desperate to secure Connor's future that they mortgaged the house to get more investment money. Now they've got nothing. They're about to lose the house." She paused, and I could hear her taking a deep breath. "Your dad's business has been having legal troubles." This was the final nail in the coffin. The irony wasn't lost on me. For the first time in his life, Connor wasn't the golden child anymore. Everything had fallen apart, and my parents had turned on him. "You brought her into this family." My aunt mimicked my father's voice. "This is your fault. You've ruined us. Connor," she continued, imitating my mother's tearful accusations. "From perfect son to family disgrace in a matter of days. Connor Wilson had become invisible. And me? The son they'd ignored? Suddenly, I was their only hope." That night, I stood by my window again, staring at the city lights, turning this new information over in my mind. I thought about Connor, who had tormented me for years, now facing the cold reality of our parents' conditional love. I thought about my father, the man who ruled our family with an iron fist, now watching his empire crumble. And my mother, who had always chosen the path of least resistance, now forced to confront the consequences of her choices. I should have felt vindicated, triumphant even. This was karma at its finest. A perfect, poetic justice I couldn't have orchestrated better myself. Instead, I felt hollow, empty, as if I were watching strangers in a tragedy rather than the family who had shaped me through their neglect. My phone buzzed with another text from my mother. "Please call us. We need to talk." I turned the phone face down on the table and walked away. A week later, there was a knock on my door. I wasn't expecting visitors. When I checked the security camera, I froze. My parents stood in the hallway, looking diminished against the sleek backdrop of my upscale apartment building. My father, once a proud, intimidating man, now appeared small and exhausted. My mother was pale, her eyes darting nervously. They weren't the people I'd grown up with. They were broken versions of themselves. As I opened the door, I witnessed something I never thought I'd see. Robert Wilson bowing his head before me. "Alex, you're our only hope. Please, help us." I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, studying them. Part of me, a part I thought I'd buried, felt a twinge of satisfaction seeing them humbled like this. "We never meant to treat you unfairly," my mother said, her voice trembling. "The family went through difficult times, misunderstandings. We can start over," my father added. "Fix everything. Be a family again." I looked at them impassively. Once I might have believed them, but I wasn't that child anymore. "If Connor hadn't ruined everything, would you be standing here right now?" I asked quietly. Silence. "If everything was still perfect, if you still had your money, your house, your golden child, would you have ever called me?" More silence. That was all the answer I needed. Something shifted in my father's posture. He straightened his back, the old arrogance returning to his eyes. "Alex, you're the eldest, the brother. It's your duty to help the family." His tone was no longer pleading but demanding, as if it was something I owed. As if I was still that little boy begging for approval. "You're the only one who can fix this," he continued. "You have money, connections. If you don't step up, what kind of son does that make you?" I almost smiled. That was the real reason they were here. Not because they were remorseful, not because they suddenly cared, but because I was their only option left. I stepped forward, meeting their desperate gazes with the calmest expression I'd ever worn. "So now you need me, is that right? Now I'm important? But tell me, when I needed you, where were you?" Neither of them spoke. I nodded, as if finally understanding something I'd spent a lifetime trying to figure out. Without another word, I stepped back and closed the door. Not just the door to my home, the door to them, to the past, to the part of me that thought they might change. A few days later, there was another knock. This time it was Connor. Gone was the smirk. Gone was the arrogance. He stood there, shoulders hunched, eyes red and swollen. "Please, Alex, I have no one else. Mom and Dad kicked me out." He clutched at something. Anything. "I was wrong. I know that. But you're still my brother, aren't you? We're still family, right?" I stepped forward, facing him completely. Connor's eyes flickered with hope, as if he thought I was about to forgive him. "Family? When did you ever treat me like family? You stole my childhood. You made sure I never belonged anywhere. You never treated me like a brother. And now? Now you're just getting a taste of what I lived through for years. And I don't owe you a thing." Connor crumpled, his shoulders shaking. But I felt nothing. No pity, no anger, just closure. That was the last time I saw Connor. After that day, no one from the Wilson family contacted me again. They simply vanished from my life. One night, sitting on my balcony watching the city lights twinkle, I finally understood something. Family isn't where you're born. It's where you're truly loved. I don't regret my decision. Maybe someday, I'll build a family of my own, the kind I actually deserve.